Well, welcome to Happy Times and Places, and thanks for listening as I, Toby Haydock, watch a Doctor Who story chosen by a friend of mine, and I watch and commentate and occasionally mix metaphors and go down blind alleys as I try to identify what their favourite thing about each episode might be.
Through the millennia, the subscribers of Happy Times and Places led a life of loving Doctor Who, ordered calm, yeah, right, maybe, protected from all negative fan threats by Toby's great power. But this was to change. Suddenly and terribly, Toby faced the most protracted, off-topic, dangerous person to suggest a story in this podcast's long history.
Predictable as ever, eh, Toby? Sorry about that. A bit self-indulgent. Hello, I'm Tom Curley, or Daren Thomas, or Daren Thomas Curley, depending on where you know me from. I know, confusing, isn't it? I'm English-born Irishman. I am also a neurodivergent writer with autism and ADHD. So the reason I mention that is that I might take a while to get to what I'm trying to say, and I probably will go off at tangents, but I'll endeavour to do my best, promise. Okay, my background, I worked in TV and film for many years and kind of still do as a writer, or try to. That's probably the more the point. I worked on shows like Strange, which was kind of weird Doctor Who-like show. Don't know if you saw it. Foyle's War, and more recently, quite a long time, the late lamented medical drama, Holby City. I say late and lamented. It certainly was to me and my bank manager. As for my Who credentials, I grew up being a very old man with a triumvirate of great doctors. As a child, my first doctor was the brilliant John Pertwee, followed by Tom Baker, and then as a teen, Peter Davison. They really are my doctors. Each hold a very special place in my growing up and heart, and I think a great time for the show. So I was very lucky to grow up with all of that. It's very much my autistic obsession, Doctor Who, has been all my life. I don't think it's ever going to leave me, truth be told. Anyway, thank you, Toby, for allowing me to suggest something which isn't just any old story for me, a Doctor Who story. This has stayed with me over the years. It's probably my favourite Doctor Who story of all time. I was 7 years old when this dark dystopian vision hit the screens. I was enthralled, excited and terrified, all in one. And I even went as far as, this is basically all we had back in the day, which were these things. The Target novelizations. It's my original copy because I've drawn on it, and I've even drawn a really nice sort of little TARDIS in there as well. And I put a little note underneath, put starring Tom Baker as the Doctor, in case that didn't already give it away. Some other drawings there. Another TARDIS. I was a little bit obsessed by TARDISes. So this was a version of how you could keep a copy of a favourite story that you loved. And this, as you can see, is well thumbed and well read because I loved the story so much as a kid. It really encapsulated everything that I personally wanted to see when the Doctor went back to his home world. And I hadn't seen before, obviously, because that was the first time they'd done it in my living memory. It's quite a controversial story, I found out since, of course, with fandom. So it's an interesting one. Okay, so let's move on, and I'll give you the things that I love from each episode, starting now.
Lovely Daren Thomas there, where did we first meet Daren? Was it in Edinburgh? It was certainly around, I think it was in Edinburgh. Moths ate my Doctor Who scarf, and then you've kindly come to other shows of mine, and then when I was in an episode of Holby City, not just an episode, the Christmas episode of Holby City, we hooked up there, and we've kept in touch and exchange messages, which makes us probably think we're more in touch than we actually are due to the joys of the modern way of doing things in social media, but always nice to hear from Daren. And I'm really glad that he's taken part in this and chosen the deadly assassin as he gave you his sort of journey towards it. He was 7. I didn't realise he was that much older than me, because I think if you probably looked at us both, you'd think I was about 70 years older than him. But Daren, so he He said he was 7 when it was on. Well, I'm afraid I was sort of 2, and so I don't remember it. We had the Target novel though, and that is funny because when Daren was talking about his, I thought, oh, how do I describe mine? I'll describe mine as well thumbed, and then he said well thumbed. So we're obviously simpatico on that one, and it's a brilliant cover with the cadaverous master's face on, and then Time Lords in Time Lord regalia flanking it either side. And I remember saying to one of my brothers, because they were my brother's books, and in fact the Deadly Assassin that we have is very scuffed at the bottom. I think the spine is rather mangled and broken, because it's one of those, I associate all of those with a really happy times reading some of those books. Planet of Evil is another one. Those ones from that Tom Baker period that occurred just before I was sort of cognizant. I'd have probably been around when they were on. I may well have been rocking on a knee whilst my brothers were watching The Deadly Assassin, but I have no memories of it. That period to me seemed like one of great stories, and then when I did revisit when I visited the Hinchliffe era on video, it was the one I found the least disappointing. But I'm sure I've said that many times in Happy Times and Places. But I remember saying to one of my brothers, Pyramids of Mars is another one from that period, and Talons of Weng Chiang, those books, and in fact I got I've got better quality copies of those books since, either reprints, but they seem sort of shinier, and even the ones with the same covers. I have more affection for the knackered ones, the well-thumbed ones, the ones that were taken on holidays and probably sat on in tents and have bits bent and they may have not been well kept, but they were definitely well loved, and they're not things I'll ever want to sell. So any idea of them having sort of any value doesn't matter. But they do have every crack in those. Every piece of probably I can't recall if there's scribble in the Deadly Assassin, but some of our Target books have scribble in because I have 2 older brothers and we're all sort of doodlers. I think I stopped, I stopped that sort of thing when I took over the collection, as it were. But I'm sure there are bits and bobs in some of them, particularly those early ones. And but yes, the replacement seems somehow too shiny, especially with this story, which seemed to have a sort of dustiness about it. It seemed to have the aspect of some of my brothers also had lots of, I think inherited from my dad maybe, sort of war books, that our house bookshelves were lined with, daring do Second World War adventure type of books that I think probably were my dad's, but they seem to be cut from a similar cloth to that, And I remember saying to one of my brothers, what's this story about? And I'm saying, it's about the Doctor, chasing this guy, or being chased by this guy. There's nothing about sort of Gallifrey, nothing about the Master. It's the bit that seemed to sort of sit with them the most was the chase in the jungle. I don't think he said a jungle, but I got the impression it was a sort of game of cat and mouse, between the Doctor and a guy. So that was the impression I had of it until obviously I then read it, and I remember really liking the character of Castellan Spandrel and the name. I loved all the names and everything. But it was one that was sort of highly thought of, I thought, and so then when I got it on, I remember borrowed it off a friend. I think I had episode 1 on the end of a 6-parter. So I borrowed the 6-parter, and episode 1 was on the end. Because in those days, you didn't get things in chronological order. People's collections were quite eccentric, mine included, where you'd have odd things. I had Android Invasion 1 to 4 and Spearhead from Space 1 to 3 on the same E180, and I'd started watching, mopping up stories at quite a rate now, because I had a friend who lent me stuff rather than when I'd been collecting, when I had to choose very carefully and got 3 tapes every 4 months or whatever. And so I was borrowing them and watching them, and quite often being disappointed because I was in fact I wasn't savouring them. I was going through them too quickly. But I remember watching part 1 of The Deadly Assassin on the end of whatever this tape was, and being amazed at how good it was, and even though I knew the story and I'd read the book, going, oh no, this has been done really well, and I'm excited by this, and then so I quickly asked my friend for the other 3 episodes, which were probably on a tape with the Ark or something, and finding it really exciting and not a disappointment. And I think prior to that, the talking point had really been, again, what my brother talked about, part 3. Part 3 had sort of gone down in history as, the one that had this spectacular Matrix sequence that was, an important part of a landmark episode in the show's history. And I'm sure we'll talk about part 3. Hey, maybe during part 3. And it was only later that I discovered that the story had been hated by fans because of its rewriting of Doctor Who history, its altering of the show's DNA in a blasphemous and pesky way. And of course, after that initial, destroyed the magic of Doctor Who and all of that, which I had, as I say, I only discovered much later on, and with great amusement, because when I discovered that, Deadly Assassin was, seen as one of the show's, venerated classics. Now I think it seems to have gone down a little in popularity, but I still retain my vestiges of when I first discovered it, or the first 2 times I discovered it, once by Target novel and once by video, where I've never not been thrilled and impressed by Deadly Assassin. It's definitely a favourite of mine, although I'm sure we will have much to talk about when we get to part 4, because the Hinchliffe era does have a habit of going off the rails a bit in part 4, and how forgiving you are of that is sometimes due to taste, sometimes due to context, sometimes due to upbringing. I don't know, but I said, and before jumping into this afternoon, I was going to just jump in and do the commentary, and I thought, well, no, because that will spoil it for me, because I'm going to have to work over it. So I have actually just watched the first couple of episodes for pleasure, and I had a great pleasure watching them. So let's hope I've bottled that magic and can communicate my pleasure to you over the course of the next 25 minutes, when I will be firing up part 1 of The Deadly Assassin, which so sorry if I've spoiled that for you. That this will not be a struggle for me, but it really is a genuine favourite of mine, and I hope I can convey that to you, and that you enjoy the journey with me. So fire up your Gothic lettering and start rolling your rollery thing, and let us depart on our own for a solo trip to Gallifrey and part 1 of The Deadly Assassin in 3, 2, 1. Well, first things first, of course, it's a terrible title. Well, it's not a terrible title. It didn't occur to me that it was a terrible title until many years later, and I mention, and it's one of the early jokes in Moths Ate My Doctor Who scarf, where I do a joke about he's to be any sort of effective assassin, being deadly as you would have thought the minimum requirement. I think I said Doctor Who and the myopic sniper, I think I say at one point as well. Anyway, this is a curious bit. I know some people hate this bit. It feels to me like it's the show going, this is actually quite an important moment, because we're going back to Gallifrey, and then we're going to subvert some of the expectations we have of Gallifrey, but this is a big deal. It's interesting that Tom Baker decides not to go full throttle with it, and he's quite laid back in his delivery of long history, whereas other actors, I think, would try and give it a bit more welly. But I get the impression that he knows that his voice carries enough natural import that he doesn't need to sell it, which I think can sometimes lead to him being a bit, well, that's how I'm going to do it, and leave it at that. But I might be reading too much into that. I don't normally like premonitions of things. Just a taste thing. I'm not wild about dream sequences and all that sort of stuff. But of course, they weave this into the narrative very well, and there's a scientific explanation as to why he sees it. So that's fine. But I remember not quite enjoying it in the book. I don't like sort of Netflix series where you see something happening, and this happens a lot, and that the hero's about to die, and then it goes 15 years earlier, and you don't then get to that bit till about episode 9, and I'm like, oh, are you basically saying a dramatic high point is episode 9, and you're teasing me with that to make me watch the rest of it? But that's I'm aware that I'm probably in the minority with that, but that is a bit like that, so that's not normally to my taste, but I think it works here, especially as we have to have something to to sort of be driving the Doctor. There aren't many Doctors, I think, who could get away with talking to themselves. And obviously this is Tom wanting to do this because he didn't really necessarily want a companion. But I think this proves that it wouldn't have sustained itself. He gets away with it here most of the time. And because the episode is so well made, you sort of forgive it. But I'm put it like this: I'm glad he didn't have to do this all of the time, even though he's great. He's I think Tom Baker is so good. He's the perfect mix of obtusely eccentric, charming and funny, but also absolutely, gritty, dramatic. And Gallifrey looks fantastic. Look at James Acheson's costumes. These guard costumes, endured. There's this sort of scholastic / monastic aesthetic to Gallifrey, which I think is absolutely right. It's a great way of conveying a sort of aura about them, of them being learned and them having formalities and them being a society, and yet it's all quite this is what the Hinchliffe era does so well. It uses old-fashioned things to suggest the austere, which doesn't date anything. There's no question that this is in the past, but it stops it from being sort of dated because it's not a 1970s view of the future where everyone's in silver and spangly hats and things. And I think that's why the sort of sci-fi of Hinchliffe often, the Doctor will take out a leather bag rather than a big space box or whatever, and it helps to if it's full of the regalia of the past, where things were made better, things are leather and things are handmade, it just gives it, as I say, a sort of an austere aesthetic that gives it a timelessness that makes it not seem hokey as science fiction often can. I must get past the one warn the president is one of the ones where we have to have him say that out loud so that we know what he's going to do, and whereas the bit where he's talking to the TARDIS is quite fun. But look, yes, again, not a computer printout, a fountain pen and a nice piece of paper. And that just, as I say, I think there's a wonderful aesthetic about this, and this ties in with this TARDIS console room, which I really like. I can see what they're aiming for. I don't think the console's big enough, but I like what they're aiming for. Cash and carry Constantin. I don't really know what he means there, but I remember being and one of my brothers, I think. Oh no, maybe it was one of my college mates, university mates, being very impressed that he'd got a bong. I know we call it a hookah or whatever, but I think people do smoke the marijuana out of those, and so you could confer that upon it if you wanted to. It's the Doctor having not a futuristic-y thing, but a thing he's picked up on his travels. And Commander Hilrid, I think he's Hildred in the book, but he's Hilrid here. And I thought for a while it was just George Pravda, his pronunciation, his issue for him. But it's in the credits, he's Hilrid, not Hildred. This is Derek Seaton, who, sadly, like the entire cast of this episode, and indeed this story, bar Tom Baker, is no longer with us. But Derek Seaton, although he's probably the youngest member of the cast, was one of the first to go. There's Pat Gorman, bless him, who's about to go in fictional life, and is also sadly no longer with us in real life. But Pat Gorman, legendary supporting artiste and occasional small part player. The Doctor is so smart. He thinks very quickly, and it's brilliantly plotted, this, because there's got to be a reason why they think he's up to no good. And it's because somebody's lurking in the shadows and has killed the guard, so it looks like he's killed the guard. It's beautifully plotted. I love this. And here's Eric Chitty. Eric Chitty, who's very old. I love that. That's such good. He thinks Spandrel says what, and so he starts repeating the whole thing because he thinks it sounds. And then Earth, where's Earth? Sol 3 mutters Spiral. They have another name. They have another a sort of way of cataloguing Earth, which to us is our entire existence. To them, it's another place. The CIA, Celestial Intervention Agency. This is just establishing stuff, and it is full of jokes, none of which are being played stupidly. World building. I mean, the CIA thing is a little on the nose, but it's a kids program, and I think it's done with the maturity and it's fine. And just little things like the way that Castellan Spandrel is sitting on the computer bank. Often people will treat their science fiction stuff with reverence because they're on a science fiction set, whereas of course, for Spandrel, it's not a science fiction set; it's his workplace, and he's a man of authority who can lean on a computer bank. It's little touches like that make this alien planet, this austere alien planet, the planet of the Time Lords. My goodness, actually real, plausible, without doing that thing that I think a lot of modern sci-fi does is trying to make it too like our world. There's nobody talking in modern day slang or anything like, look, he's got a mint, he eats a mint. And I love the way he's rude to Hilrid. And I think there's a great anecdote that Mitch Mitchell has, is that originally, Pravda was supposed to have his lines written on that piece of paper, and for one of the takes, they gave him the one with the Gallifreyan writing on, and he didn't have a clue what to do. But all of this stuff is done with such great economy, no little wit. It's really, really funny, and credit to Derek Seaton. So yeah, look, in this shot, Derek Seaton and Eric Chitty both died not long after this. Seaton very young, Chitty much older, but yes, very sad. But there's some high shots in this too, and this set must be small, but David Maloney films it so well. Predictable as ever, Doctor. That's what the Master says, of course. And it's actually superimposed over a close-up of his face just before the Doctor regenerates in Legopolis. So I remember when I first saw this, I was quite surprised to see that line wasn't in a close-up of the Master's face. Bernard Horsfall klaxon, George Pravda klaxon, and I love that little line that Engin has in that previous scene where he says, "Oh, the Castellan, your duties involve you with the more plebeian classes." It's so rich yet so economic. Robert Holmes establishes this society, even though we only have a handful of speaking parts. He establishes how this society works. And this whole thing about the different chapters of the Time Lords, we don't really get much of that for the rest of the season. But again, for the series, But he's obviously thought about it a lot, and I love this that you have ideas of going, well, if we take some guards, we will lose pomp and circumstances. It's a way that a society works, and that that there's give and take, and that that you would have on a state occasion, you would have pomp and circumstance, but you would also have security, and one is weighed up against the other. That is all very real, and often and that's rare in science fiction, especially sort of quick, especially children's science fiction or science fiction that's suitable for children. But yes, there's so much more that could be done with these different chapters. The heliotrope of the Patrexes, what wonderful vocabulary Holmes uses to paint such vivid pictures with such economy. And then you've got a sort of David Dimbleby as played by Hugh Walters here. And I love the way that when he says the heliotrope of the Patrexes, and then he goes, and so on, which is a very, very BBC presenter type of thing to do. And again, it's a little on the nose, but it's witty. It's not stupid, and everybody is doing what you should do with comedy. Is nobody's showing that they're being funny, and as a result, a lot of this, as I say, I think Derek Seaton resists the temptation to make Hilrid behave like the blunderer that Spandrel, and indeed the script on occasion, treats him as being, and he would have been really annoying if he'd been as stupid as he is lambasted for being. And I love Cardinal Barusa, who is so waspish and puts him down, and that's quite a triumphant moment, because and yet Runcible, another brilliant name. It's a Runcible spoon, isn't there, in The Owl and the Pussycat? Runcible, Spandrel, Pridonians, Archalians, Patrexes, Panopticon, all of this stuff. They're words that are unfamiliar and yet not stupid. They're actual words from, sort of cherry-picked from different places to come together to make this place that seems to have a a consistent sort of sets of nomenclature for different things. We even have transduct, don't we, rather than transmat or transport. And I just think it is so deftly and intelligently handled and painted. And now, Harry H. Fielder klaxon. So not only has it got Pat Gorman, it's also got Harry Fielder, which is lovely. And of course, this again gets transported to the museum, which I was questioning this. I thought, well, no, I suppose you would go if it's that they've set up that it's an ancient artifact, that it's as old a TARDIS as these guys have seen. So you would, why not hold it in the museum? I suppose if you had more time and space and wanted to add verisimilitude. Can you add verisimilitude? You'd sort of maybe want it to be put in quarantine or something first, but the story needs to be got on with, and it's convenient for the storytelling to have him in the museum, because also in the museum are the different robes, one of which he needs to steal to get in. It's a little stretch, but I allow it because it lets us get on with the story, and it's a reasonably well worked out way of facilitating getting to the story where it needs to get out. It is a bit of a stretch, but I forgive it because the whole thing is, doesn't take too many liberties and is done, and even this going, the doctor is probably knows he's walking into a trap, but he's got to do it anyway because that's how he's. That's how he's got to get involved in the story. But it's not. Sometimes people get involved in adventure stories, and it's really frustrating because you go, "Can't you see you walk into a trap?" Where the doctor kind of knows, but he thinks, "Well, I may as well do it because that's the way I'm going to find out what the trap is and who's behind it." That's a lovely shot of the Master's horrible eyes. I think that mask is great. I do think it's a shame the mouth isn't quite as mobile as it might be, but it's a startling image. And I remember there being photos of that. There's a photo of it in one of the Doctor Who Celebration or one of the hardback Heinings. And I photocopied that and decorated a book with it. Because it is a fantastic visual. I think it's probably better in a scary black and white photo than it is mobile. And again, I think that's partially because of the mouth, but it is still a well constructed mask, and those eyes are horrible. And it's a brilliant visual. But I can understand why people who'd been in awe of the Time Lords when they first met them in the War Games and have seen them as rather sort of godlike figures, slightly hammy and godlike figures in the slightly less godlike in the Pertwee era, but they were still sort of austere, but they certainly weren't the sort of magic god people that had been in the War Games. So this isn't a total change. And of course, Robert Holmes had the city gent bowler-hatted, rather witty Time Lord in Terror of the Autons, which I'm sure anybody who'd loved them in the War Games might also have objected to. So Holmes is somebody that you could see as somebody who dismantles a lot, Doctor Who's most sacred of cows, or sort of dismantles them in the Terror of the Autons and then sends them to the slaughterhouse here. I love this. I love the two. It's John Dawson, who was the original William Sims in Adam Adamant, but got dropped and hurt his back, so was replaced by Jack May, and Michael Bilton, from The Massacre and from Pyramids of Mars. What fella? You could tell from the way he says "what fella" that's Michael Bilton, also famous for a Yellow Pages advert of playing for To the Manor Born and Waiting for God. Wonderful, genial character actor. And John Dawson and this non-speaking actor is called Brian Nolan. He's about to get killed. So I can understand why people who'd seen the Time Lords as they were initially conceived might find this satire of them sacrilegious. But of course, Doctor Who has also always had a slightly sort of anarchist streak, and I think if you're going to change, some aspects of the show's DNA, it has to be for good purpose. No mica dust. You see, that's a brilliant. And I love this. The dirt of the past and the old crimes besmirch the fingers. It's beautiful stuff. And I think this Time Lord Society is so well drawn, and it's not a ripping up of the rule book. It's as Holmes himself said, he finds godlike beings rather boring, and in the same way that our official bodies, whether it be royal families or parliaments, that all have their ceremony and their regalia and their pomp and circumstance. Underneath it are human beings who are venal and who are petty and who are grasping. Not necessarily particularly, but in the same way that they are in staff rooms and dressing green rooms and families, and so he's cut through all of that to show the real people underneath, and they're so well drawn, real people. Llewellyn Rhys here as the president, and Maurice Quick was actually an extra in the 10th Planet, but he gets a couple of lines here, so he gets a credit as Gold Usher. But he was also often did supporting artist work. But Llewellyn Rhys, he gets top billing as well, which I actually think is rather good, even though, because he is the president and he is the final image, even though he's only got a couple of lines, and it's not in order of appearance before you say anything. But he's, of course, famous for Withnail and I, where he owns the tea rooms. The police, Miss Blenner has it. He was also, I think he worked with Donald Wolfett a bit. He certainly was interviewed, I think, by Simon Callow and a couple of people about, he gave interviews about his career and some of the greats he'd worked with, because he continued working and lived to a great age. I mean, I think he was one of those actors that always looked really old. But yes, I can understand fans who were cross at the undermining of the Time Lords, and I understand more. It's odd. I never really think of this as a master story, even though the master is on it. And no disrespect to Peter Pratt, who's got an excellent voice. It's odd how little, and considering the circumstances with which the instigator of the role is not available, Roger Delgado, and who was so good. The fact that the character is introduced, and stupid yoika like that, the fact the character is introduced without any sort of fanfare, and I think you only really find out it's the master if you read the closing credits of this episode. If you imagine now the reintroduction of such a key character would really be now. Sometimes, of course, the show can get too caught up in its own mythology and make a big deal to the alienation of the casual audience. But I can understand anyone who fondly remembered Roger Delgado going, "What? Hang on, our urbane, witty villain we love to hate is now a psychopathic walking cadaver." But that is a reasonable reframing of the character, and perhaps some would argue more respectful than getting somebody to, be like Anthony Ainley, be a sort of version of the same character with the, black clothes and the beard, rather than what we've learnt to do later, which is have different actors interpret the master's villainy in a different way. But it does seem a bit odd that they reintroduce and change the character with such little sort of fanfare. But I suppose because he's coming back to Gallifrey, you do want him to have a nemesis who is a big deal. I love this cliffhanger, and I love that. And I remember knowing it was coming and not actually thinking on paper it was a great cliffhanger, because, for God's sake, you see it at the beginning of the episode. You read it. It's the first thing that happens in the book. So I remember thinking, well, it's basically doing the Netflix thing, isn't it? It's catching us up, and now the story's going to start properly. But actually, the way that it is done, Dudley Simpson's music is excellent, by the way. The production design is excellent. There's lots of high cameras. It's a beautifully rounded and mounted production. But the way that it builds up to that episode ending, and then you have the freeze frame. Now, a lot of things like that can date. We know how quickly CSO dated, and some other effects, or the bubble wrap in the Ark in space. The thing that was, the exciting new thing becomes the quaint old thing during the passage of time. And that freeze frame could well be. There are other, videotape freeze frames, because I don't know if you remember, but domestic videotapes, if you tried to freeze frame them, which many an adolescent boy might have done, especially if they'd recorded a film with Jenny Agutter in it that was on after midnight. You got a sort of snowy effect and an unstable picture, and you didn't get the sort of clean freeze frame that you now would get with DVD technology, etc. So a clean freeze frame was an amazing thing. But actually, if you look at it on the opening titles of things and some of the closing titles, of things like Bergerac, where it's Bergerac's early title sequences, opening and closing. I think because a lot of them are, but are they on film though? Isn't Bergerac on film? But anyway, I've watched some title. Maybe it's not Bergerac. No, but certainly the later Bergerac title sequences look really cheap and nasty because they're sort of freeze frames. But they might not be video. They might be film. But they still look cheap and nasty in a way that the earlier opening titles do. And yet, for their time, they were probably much more sophisticated. And I think The Gentle Touch, which is another crime drama from ITV, which I think its opening titles mix videotape and film to an egregious extent. But also, a lot of those programs at that time would use a video freeze frame without the snowy thing because we can do video freeze frames to capture an exact moment. Auf Wiedersehen Pet, I think, did the same in some of its titles, and they dated very quickly. They look naff. There's just something very 80s about freeze framed videotape, but they work in these late 70s Doctor Who's, mid to late 70s Doctor Who's. They work in Genesis of the Daleks. They're a trademark of David Maloney that somehow have contrived not to date like examples of them that came later. It's something to do with the picture quality. It's something to do with the way they integrated into the piece. I know the one at the end of episode 2 of Genesis of the Daleks is on film, which will help, and that's great. But he uses the effect in Planet of Evil, and he uses it here, and it's a sort of directorial trademark, and some directorial trademarks do date. I do not think this does, and I knew this episode ending was coming. I wasn't that wild about it coming because I didn't think it was a particularly exciting moment because, the story is about, the mystery of the story is resolved pretty quickly in our eyes, and it's more about, the cat and mouse with the master or whatever. But actually what this episode does, and the cliffhanger is partly responsible, is it sets up the, oh my God, it looks like the Doctor has shot the president. Now, obviously, we're disabused of that notion very early in the next episode, but we'll talk about that next time. But I think I remember the first time I saw that cliffhanger, knowing it was coming and going, oh, no, this was good. This was better than I expected. And Doctor Who was so often not better than I expected because I'd conjured movies in my head. But it was all about David Maloney, the director, using the resources at his disposal to make Robert Holmes's excellent script sort of sing and dance in the way that it had been intended. And I think it's a synthesis of Holmes, Hinchliffe, Maloney, Roger Murray-Leech, the dream team, when you could throw James Acheson in there as well, who made Doctor Who so handsome looking, so dynamically made, so elegantly, thrillingly written. I think that episode is damn near perfect, even though it has the compromise of going, I probably wouldn't have the Doctor talking to himself in the TARDIS all the time, but I still think it's allowable and it's getawayable with, partially because Tom Baker is so good at that sort of stuff, and he's such a presence. He's got such an advantage over so many other actors in that he's just effortlessly watchable, and and at this juncture is balancing the humorous and the dramatic absolutely perfectly. And it's weird, isn't it? Because this feels like a season finale, even though it's the sort of middle story of season 14. But Hand of Fear could be a season finale because Sarah Jane leaves, and you think, oh no, it's not. And you have to remind yourself, and go, oh no, because there's Deadly Assassin. That's where he goes home to Gallifrey, and it's the one who is on his own, and the Master comes back. That's oh no, that's not the season finale either. What about the one where he gets the new companion? And I mean, I just think season 14 is absolutely superb. It's a really, really strong piece of work, and I'm more comfortable in stories that are set in Earth's past than I am with futuristic ones. But you see, this one does it so well, but also so does Robots of Death. Actually, is that it creates an aesthetic that is that plays against our expectations of science fiction being all gleaming white, or even now, and this obviously came later, but has become very much its own staple sci-fi aesthetic of, you know, the rust and the dripping water and all of that, which is a rebellion against stuff that was all too clean and gleamy. Doctor Who goes the other way. It goes, no, well, let's go for something that evokes the Gothic, whatever that may be, but, you know, that evokes cathedrals and churches and libraries, and so it gives it an austere nature. There are cobwebs, there are mysteries, so it even has a sort of horror movie vibe in what is actually a sort of political thriller, and that's a beautiful combination. And I just think so many of those deceptive lines that are scene setting, that are character building, he's so deft with the economy that he writes this home. I think the world building in this story is absolutely phenomenal, and I think the characters are delightful. I've not even talked about George Pravda, but we've got plenty of time. But what will I choose as my favourite thing? I mean, there's so much in that glorious, glorious episode of Doctor Who. As I say, despite the fact that I totally acknowledge, if you saw the Time Lords as godlike beings with special powers who could hypnotise people with their eyes and make Philip Maddock dematerialise, you know, I could understand if this is, you know, this is an obtuse recalibration of what they are. And I can understand, I think particularly if you're a fan of Roger Delgado and the Master and what he's been established as, the way that he's reintroduced and the role that he plays in this story could seem to be some form of desecration, even though, you know, it's a fabulous visual, and there's a very nice sort of dogged cruelty to this master, who, although that idea of the Doctor dying very quickly is contrary to what a lot of villains do, isn't it? Where they say, I want you to die slowly, so slowly it'll give you time to escape. It's quite against the cliche. He goes, no, we're just gonna kill, we'll frame him and then we're just gonna kill him. And I also do feel a little bit sorry for, spoiler alert, Bernard Horsfall having to go, well, because the viewers don't know I'm the baddie yet, I shall have to whisper in these scenes. But at least he wasn't given a Time Lord pencil to twiddle. But, yeah, you know, we are in, you know, sci-fi adventure, tea time adventure territory. You know, I let all of that go because I think everybody is firing on such cylinders. There's so much that I admire in this. It is rigorous, it is intelligent, it is witty, it is dynamic, it is well plotted, it is exciting, and it does everything that it intends to do. And I also like the fact that you see the Doctor sort of out of his costume and in his long johns and things like that. It's just little touches like that that just make it feel real, even though we're, you know, out there with the space cardinals in the space library planet, you know. So for going into this, I was going to choose the cliffhanger because it was such a surprise, even though I knew it was coming, and because that freeze frame just makes it extra special, and because it does, I think, genuinely make you go, the Doctor shot the President, what the hell is going on? It's a cliffhanger that makes you go, I absolutely need to come back next week to see what has happened there. But as I was commentating along to that, because of all the lines, it's got to be, and because of the aesthetic that I talked about, and how the Time Lords are portrayed, I think it's got to be the world building. It has to be the world building. I mean, I would, or do I save that for later? Go on, Toby. Every time I try and play a cunning game, and we've got cliffhangers coming up. But the part 3 cliffhanger's not the best bit about part 3. I'm not wild about the part 2. No, I'm going to choose the cliffhanger and hope that Daren doesn't choose the world building, economy of dialogue, whatever it is I was going to choose. Something about, you know, how Gallifrey is portrayed and what a you know, intelligent and economic way it is of creating you know, a new world for us. You know, we're not dealing with the rules that we understand of present day or even postulated future Earth. We're kind of starting from scratch, and yet we know exactly how this society works. Oh, love it. I love Robert Holmes. He's such a good writer. I love that I love this program. I love that I love this episode. I had so much fun watching it. So I'm going to choose the cliffhanger where the bloke from the tea shop in With Nail and I get zapped and freezes before he hits the ground. Call the Chancery Guards, Miss Blennerhassett. Castellan Spandrel. I mean, isn't that glorious? It's just his ear for dialogue is as good as his ear for names and titles and oh, love it. But I'm for now. As I say, I'm not going to be short of things to choose. But I'm going to choose the cliffhanger just because that was when I first watched this. At a time when I was watching Doctor Who and getting a bit blasé and probably watching Doctor Who stories too quickly and waiting to get on to the next one. And I was, gorging it like you do with when you get too many sweets and you shove them all down your mouth and then you realise you fail to appreciate them and you feel sick. I started to do that as I was able to borrow Doctor Who and get through stuff quicker and quicker. And I'd enjoyed it much more when I'd had a precious, tape or two that I savoured. So there's a lesson in life there as well. Take it slowly. But because I only had episode 1 on the end of, I think it might have been Planet of the Daleks, but I can't remember. And I watched episode 1. It might be the Sea Devils. Doesn't matter. And I watched episode 1 and that freeze frame. And I went, oh. And I'd enjoyed the book. And I went, oh, this is good. This is really good. At a time when Doctor Who was often disappointing because its visuals hadn't, or its realisation hadn't matched my imagination. So the cliffhanger, and let's see what Daren says.
Episode 1. My first favourite thing is quite episode specific because it's the cliffhanger.
Yes,
boring, but it's just so clever and horrifying and stayed with me. And what's brilliant about it is, in many respects, is just how it's done. The episode starts with the vision of the Doctor shooting the president in Gallifrey. And of course, as a premonition or dream sequence or whatever it is we're seeing, we're not quite sure about, it's there to make us go, oh, the Doctor's going to do this. But then, of course, we're kind of going, we know he's not going to do that. It's the Doctor, it's a bit of nonsense. Or so we think. And of course, so then it builds up with that sort of, confidence that you have to the cliffhanger where he very much does that exact thing. And you're left with disbelief. You've just seen the Doctor pick up a gun and shoot someone effectively dead. Obviously, it's not quite that, as it reveals in the end. But to all intents and purposes, you're just left with that moment of, something you smugly probably doubted. And as I say, disbelief and shock and horror at what you've just witnessed. It was amazing.
Yes! Well, that's a good start, isn't it? And... I'm so glad I stuck with my guns. It is a really, really good cliffhanger, but it's because it's not a, how will they get out of that? It's one that's been built up since the first moments, and it's intriguing, and it's plot based, and it's story based, and it's mysterious and hooking you in and making you want to watch next week for more than just the quick fix. Because he'll get out of that or whatever. It's drawing you into the story rather than into the drama or the spectacle. I loved that, folks. I hope you did too. Yeah, as I say, people. I sense that people think the Deadly Assassin's fine these days, and some people I think acknowledge that it does take some liberties with the show's lore that has been built up to that point. I think. This is how you take liberties. You do something amazing with it. You don't just change things glibly and for no reason, and to facilitate lots of boring sort of, oh, this is important because it's changing what you know. That's not dramatic because you're setting up a fiction within a fiction. What this is doing is it's a trade. It's deliberately designed to undermine, for satirical purposes, the idea of godlike figures, and what it replaces that with is something that is rich and is rewarding and is extremely well done and of serious intent, and all to facilitate the really fine story being told that tests our character, as we will see, to the limit. And And it's all done. I mean, that panopticon set is fantastic, but I'm so impressed there about, even the little bit where the TARDIS lands, and it's shot from 2 or 3 different angles that just makes that place seem much bigger and more sort of solid and real than what we know, because we're watchers of this kind of television, how it will have actually been in the studio. It's everyone is doing their very, very best, and as are Daren and I, because we've both got the same thing. So yes, please, Deadly Assassin. I'm really going to enjoy this, because there's so many fantastic things about the story that I could have in my sights. Thanks very much for listening to Happy Times and Places, which is presented by me, Toby Haydock, and my special guest, Daren Thomas. I'm grateful to Daren and to the patrons who make these podcasts possible, and they include Stephen Moffat, not that one, Ashley Knight, Paul Jones, Andrew Jordan, Christopher Joyce, Jess Jerkovic, Rick King Byatt, Andy Kitching, Clive Lewis, Guy Lambert, James Lark, Lisa and Andrew, Gavin McLean, Steve Manfreds, David Matthewman, Jason Mayo, Rosamund Phillips, Stuart Mitchell, Nathan Moore, Ian Morgan, Christopher Newman, Matthew Newton, Graham Knott, Dave Owen, Adam Parkin, Melvin Pena, Jonathan Potter, Kevin Parker, Scott Pride, Dylan Rees, John Rivers, Mark Sandham and Jim Sangster. The music is by Dave Gates and the artwork by Dylan Patterson. If you would like your name read out on the credits of Toby Haydock's Time Travels podcast, that's what these are, you can do so by becoming a patron at patreon.com/Toby Haydock, where for as little as £3 a month you get advance releases, bonus material, and pictures of my dog. But yeah, the Happy Times and Places are a few months in advance, soon to be more months in advance, because as I'm recording this, I'm slowing down the release rate to the normal, free places, in order to give a bit of added extra exclusivity and advance to the denizens of Patreonville. And so, yes, you will get these a lot earlier, and you also get an exclusive podcast, Far Too Much Information, exclusive monthly AMAs, and other bits and bobs, including sneak peeks behind the scenes of some of the DVD and Blu-ray extras that I do, as well as interviews that I've carried out with the stars and behind-the-scenes people on the show. So there's plenty there. You get generally 3 releases a week, not counting the pictures of my dog, which are a bonus. Plenty to be had, and you can get a 10% discount on your whatever tier you decide to go. £3, as I say, is the lowest if you sign up for a year in one go, which has no disadvantage. I can't keep any of your property or eat your children, but it does mean I've got you for a year. But as I say, you get 10% off for doing that. There is no commitment and also no children eating if you go to ko-fi.com/Toby Haydock and just bung a few quid in the pot every now and again, which is another way of supporting independent self-employed creatives, which is what I am, in an industry wherein we're increasingly having to sort of throw our cap on the floor as we make stuff, because that's the way that it's going. So I should stop being apologetic about it. I was listening to a podcast recently, and somebody saying, on American podcasts and things, things like this, and American creatives just go, I'm brilliant, so sign up and pay me. Whereas we have to go, I'm terribly sorry about asking for this thing that I've spent hours making, that do you want to maybe give me something, because I don't have a pension or holiday pay or anything. But anyway, there we go. I've done it, and I've couched it with a little bit of self-deprecation to show that I'm really absolutely ashamed of myself, but not so ashamed I don't do it. So it's all complicated, isn't it? Or some could say just hypocritical and mealy-mouthed. Who knows? But nonetheless, give me your money. Or if you cannot do that, and I totally understand, I get how it works, believe me, and I listen to plenty of podcasts that I love that I do not invest in financially, and that's the way of it. I'm grateful to anybody that does that, but I'm grateful to anybody that just listens, because I would be nothing if people weren't, if enough people weren't listening to this. It would be totally pointless. So I'm grateful for the numbers of just people that have given me their time. That the past hour of your time, you've decided of everything that's out there, that you've chosen to listen to my witterings, and you do that in enough numbers that makes it worthwhile doing. So I'm grateful to that. But if you are among those numbers, it's always nice to get more, and you can help me do that if you go to iTunes or Spotify or Apple or all these different places where you can give a 5-star rating and a few lines of review, and that will make my flame burn brighter and lure more moths into it. And we all know what moths do, including on YouTube, where these now upload automatically, and I've only just recently started to do it, so the numbers look terrible. I look like Billy No Mates on YouTube for these podcasts, because I've only just sort of worked out how to do it. In fact, some of them go up twice. I've no idea why. But anyway, if you do like and subscribe to my YouTube channel and give thumbs ups and views to some of the stuff that's on there, that's just really helps as well. So there we go, courting over. But thanks. Yeah. Of course, I'm on all the social medias because I'm desperate for the approval of strangers and terribly nosy. So Twitter @HaydokePodcasts is the stream dedicated to just these. @Toby Haydoke if you're interested in more than just my Doctor Who stuff, because I'm a working comedian and actor and writer, and I do other things. I'm also on Instagram @Toby.Haydoke. I've got the YouTube channel I mentioned. Please do subscribe and like to that. I have a website, www.tobyhaydoke.com, which is updated generally once a month with news of the various things that I'm up to. And I also have a Facebook page where you can like and follow and do all those bits and bobs. So if you can avail yourself of all of that stuff, it will maybe make me feel slightly less needy. It won't. It will, just because it's a vicious beast that feeds itself. But nonetheless, it's the way we seem to do things these days. So go on. Right, I think I'm podcasted out, but I did enjoy that. And yeah, I enjoyed watching it today. I actually got quite emotional. I love the fact that, so long after and it's a horrible day in the UK today. As I record this, the flames of division have been fanned, and lots of resentments building up in lots of different communities have meant that, sadly, we seem to be concentrating on what divides us rather than what unites us, and there are some pretty ugly scenes, and I'm a bit of a news junkie, so I was devouring all of this, and it was bothering me. It was messing with my head. I didn't like it, and it saddens me, and I know there's nothing I can do about it. And oh yes, I could write a tweet where I could say something, but that's I mean, I think one runs the risk of being a little self-important there. I, a nobody, will give you my opinion on current events. I have to be seen to be condemning this sort of thing. Well, I think a lot of us are sort of, what we do instead is, I think we just try and spend our days constructively and trying to make nice things that put a smile on people's face, rather than things that bother people, upset people, or destroy things. And what I love so much about Doctor Who is that it is something from so long ago that is preserved and can be looked at again and again, and continues to give joy. And actually, I've then disappeared down a rabbit hole because I started reading Angus Mackay, President Bruce's diaries. I'm sure I'll talk about that in future episodes, and found myself sort of disappearing into, I hesitate to say my happy place, because it's not a place, but I disappearing into various different hovels of distraction, where all of the grim realities of life are taken away, and that is surely how we get through our lives. And yes, it might be meaningless and trivial entertainment and all of that, but it's sort of what separates us from the animals, and it's what civilizes us, is that we are people who consume entertainment, and we tell stories, and we admire creativity. And look how much creativity, with the scantest of resources, went into part one of The Deadly Assassin. So much so that creativity resonates all these years later. You know, I was 2 when it was on. I'm 50 now. So some things must last and endure, and some things, like hopefully the events that form the backdrop of today, only just up the road from where I am, as soon, you know, consigned to the dustbin of history. But it's a reminder that it's a tricky world out there, and Doctor Who helps us negotiate it, sometimes through intensely personal stuff. But today it's not been personal stuff really. It's been sort of wider of that, slightly more nebulous even, but just a feeling that the world is hard sometimes, and Doctor Who sometimes just makes it a little easier. That might have all been very pretentious, and if it was, I'm very sorry. It's just a television programme, and it has nothing to do with the terrible events of today. But I've just said what I feel, and I may have sounded like a twat. Oh, it wouldn't be the first time. The long and the short of it is, I like Doctor Who. That's what all these... That's what I should have just... Episode 1, I like Doctor Who. That end. Now, sod off. Oh, dear. Be happy, everyone. Stay nice. Don't burn things, is what I'm trying to say. Don't set fire to things and throw things at people. Is that too much to ask? Anyway, I like Doctor Who. The end.